Okay, man. Good morning, everybody out there. We got a hazy Sunday morning here. Not quite rain, but it looks like it's coming, and that means comic book live show day, right? And I look pretty rough, man. The insomnia is hit. I'm actually supposed to be at work right now, but I got about 3 hours of sleep. So I did some reading last night, right? And I tell you what, man, I said I wasn't going to do Marvel comics on here for a while, but I think it was like Tim Surley or somebody like that says something about, hey, man, you can distinguish uh, modern Marvel with older Marvel by calling it vintage Marvel or something in a comment, right? So I got one Marvel book. It's probably the only book that I've been ordering, and I canceled the order first thing because I finally read this, right? This was a prequel to this leads to Epic Illustrated. Don't worry. But anyway, so I got a prequel to one of the last comic books that I actually consider proper Marvel, almost like a bookend. It was this series, maxi series, sort of a trilogy, if you will, with a bunch of one shots that to me felt like a bookend. It was sort of a Kingdom Come version of Kirby characters, if you will, right? And it was called Earth X, right? They called it Earth X because everybody on the planet, 20 years or so set in the Marvel universe is what it felt like, had become mutants. And it turned out it was the Terrigen Mist of the Inhumans. So it was a world of Inhumans is really what it turned into. And what was interesting about it is that Alex Ross did an interview talking about how he had to embrace what he didn't like about the Marvel Universe in order to do the series with Jim Kruger. And I thought it was fantastic. It had two sequels, Paradise X and Universe X, or maybe it was Universe X and then Paradise X. And they sort of got a little bit weaker and a little bit weaker. So what I ended up getting was a prequel to it. And I went back and forth like, oh God, it's Marvel. Do I want to do this? Would I ever be able to talk about it on this channel? And it's by Alex Ross and Jim Kruger and some artist named Welby, right? So I went ahead and got this, and I tried to read this last night, and it's freaking horrible. I could not finish it. I'm going to give it another shot. And all that did was just kind of make me want to read things when, comics were full of ideas and colors and characters and big concepts and just creativity and things that were out there. This book starts out with a character, a kid that looks like Richard Ayoda. I think that's how you say his name. And he's off of the IT Crowd. He's off of Garth Marenghi's A Dark Place. A lot of comedy stuff. He was in some movie, maybe Evolution or something, that was basically a bad ripoff of Ghostbusters. That was horrible and stuff. But when you see the kid, you'll get what I'm saying here. But I'm going to comment here, and it's going to lead to, like I said, okay, so here's the kid that's in this. And of course, they're watching he's playing with his toys of his classic superheroes and the colors and stuff. And I was really surprised by this because they have like the comic book dots and all the coloring and stuff to offset the dark interiors and stuff. When his whole family is sitting there and they're watching the news, talking about telling people to stay in, and there's some kind of weird mist or something going on out there and the world is changing. But the kid is such a horrible beta male. It's the kind of character where the story should be about this kid becoming empowered and a man, and you're on the journey with him, and he's going to be our eyes and ears as we discover what's going on the earth with him. And it was absolutely horrible, man. I mean, it's like the most unlikable character. Marvel, the people who said they make comics based on the world outside their window, I don't know what window they're looking at, but I think they need to get a high rise, get out of that basement. So I read that. I couldn't sleep. I was getting cranky, and I whipped out something from 1982 that I got off eBay, a book that I've wanted since I was about 9 because, I love this movie. And it's The Blade Runner. This is a Marvel Super Special, the official adaptation of the Blade Runner movie by Al Williamson. And if you have followed me like on Instagram, I'm Howler Mouse on there, or if you know me on Facebook, you turn around and you realize, how excited I was to get this book. Had a stressful day at work, came in, it was in the mail, it's actually in good condition. I got it for a steal. And in the last podcast, a very out of the blue, a question that I was asked was what was my favorite cyberpunk, and I went with Johnny Mnemonic. I didn't realize that Blade Runner is considered cyberpunk. I actually started getting curious and looked up what cyberpunk was. Cyberpunk is sort of dystopia type stories with a lot of sci-fi technology, and the world's just kind of run itself into the ground. Yet we have all this great technology, and to me, I really emphasize the punk part of cyberpunk. I said Johnny Mnemonic. I like to me, it's supposed to be like punk. It's supposed to be fast paced, cyborgs, not so much androids. People just deform their bodies, much like people putting pins in their cheeks and noses, safety pins back in the 70s. The wild haircuts with the spikes and mohawks, things where people are just, the world is just distorted and it's fast paced and it has a chaotic feel. To me, Blade Runner has more of a film noir feel, and it's probably because when I saw it in the theater, it had the original cut where they added the voiceovers, it made it feel like a Humphrey Bogart movie or something, real film noir and stuff, right? So that actually led to me digging out these magazines. I started getting a little, not so much nostalgic. I'm sure nostalgia played a part in it. That's not what I'm saying, but it's just that when I think of 1982. It offsets. That was a very chaotic time in my house when I was growing up. My parents ended up splitting up a year later, what was going on. But at the same time, you had the beginning of being able to rent VHS tapes in our town. You had all these great movies coming out that I actually am glad I got to go see, like Dark Crystal, Blade Runner. We just came out of seeing Return of the Raiders of the Lost Ark. It was brought back to the theater and stuff. So that made me think about what I was reading at the time, and it just, one thing led to the other. And it was just a time where this magazine, Epic Illustrated, this is issue number 1. Of course, I didn't have this as a kid, but these magazines started out exactly what they were, what you think they were. They were, to me, Marvel's answer to heavy metal. Heavy metal was in my house thanks to the stepdad and the uncle, and I was way too young to be reading heavy metal. But it's where I discovered a lot of artists. Even though I may not have known their names, I recognized their artwork as the years went by. Mobius, heavy metal pulled in a lot of, it pulled from a French magazine called Metal Hurlet, I think that's what it was called, where we got, European comics over here is basically what we were getting. And as much as I enjoyed looking at the pictures, and the anthology stories in there, and the what felt like to my young mind, very vague little strips that were in there by John Jones, I think it was his name, and a few other people and stuff like that. I never really got the concept. I knew I was reading something big and I wasn't supposed to get it, but it was the artwork that got me. But overall, it was like hugging barbed wire is what it felt like sometimes. Some of the stories were so out there and so abrasive and so weird, which is actually a good thing. It was really, like I said, like hugging barbed wire sometimes. Yet I would go back, and I know that any time during the next page, I want to get that jolt and stuff. So, a little bit of a little massive, S&M there, if you wanted to do it. And the highly sexualized tones over there compared to what American readers were used to. A lot of illustrated movies there, right? But then all of a sudden, in the house, slowly coming into the house, were these Epic Illustrated magazines. And usually I give like big histories on the background of these books, and in the stories and what the stories meant and how they were groundbreaking or how they pushed things, what was going on. Is the chat broken? The chat has been acting up a whole lot on YouTube overall. I have seen other live shows where they've been having problems with the chat. And then last night I checked out some live shows where they had no problem. The last time we had a chat going on, it gave me the notification that I have to try again. I could not access the chat. Eric Breen, your chat is your comment's the first one I've seen. All right. So what I was saying there, lost my train of thought a little bit. Need more coffee. So I usually give big histories and what what was groundbreaking about these books and what was cool about it. And I realized flipping through these last night and a little bit this morning that it was the art that I really paid attention to as a kid. Amazingly enough, I remember the art of these books. Now, the book, it says it was a quarterly magazine that came out, and it supposedly was in 1980, but we have a Frank Frazetta cover from 1979 on the very first issue. There was a editor before Archie Goodwin came on, even though before issue 1 that was getting this book ready to go. I think it took, I think I remember reading an article when I got this number 1 a couple years ago saying that, they really built up for almost a year and had a lot of meetings and stuff on what this book was going to be and how they were going to present it. So I'm wondering if this came out at the end of 79, if not 1980. And it was a quarterly book, 4 times a year. And you would get stories in here from all sorts of artists. A lot of people are recognized from heavy metal. Arthur Pseudonym with his Mudwog in here. Some other art, but basically the people who put their work in this book kept the rights. And that's what's really what's cool about this. It's also another thing where I know I've seen some of these covers used on other magazines, and I swear I think I saw some of these stories through the years get printed elsewhere. Okay. So that's what's kind of cool about these. Marvel also pulled out a few of the stories that they did in here and made them into their Marvel graphic novels. Elric the Dreaming City by Roy Thomas and P. Craig Russell ran through this series, and those got pulled out. I think there was a Miranda the She-Wolf maybe also got pulled out of Epic magazine and reprinted. People didn't realize they were reprints, such as I at the time, came from Epic Illustrated. So let's see what we got here. Heavy Metal was the only weird mag that would come to my small Alabama town. I didn't know how it made it past the morality police. Yeah, Toki Death Hammer. Yeah, and that's what I mean. It was very jarring, especially as a kid. I'm like 5, 6, 7, 8 years old, seriously reading heavy metal and Savage Sword of Conan magazines as they came in the house. Meanwhile, I'm buying Legion of Superhero books and Justice League and a few Avengers here, just team books mostly that I can, off the top of my head. You got an allowance. It was He-Man toys, G.I. Joe toys, riding my bike all the time, and trying to get as much bang for my buck, if you will, by having as many heroes in a book as I could. That was one of the things I really liked. Meanwhile, I'm reading the uncles and stepdads' old comic books and these magazines that are coming through. Now, Epic Illustrated, I really cracked up a couple years ago because this magazine, people who were there reading this remember it fondly, in my opinion. The people that I bring it up, people brought out that are very old. I would bring up Epic Illustrated and somebody would go into a room and come out and they'd have like a beat up copy of this separated from the staples because the cover is very fragile. That's the thing about these books. They're very fragile. Very thin paper for a cover that wraps around, comes off the staples very easy. And on the inside, it's real easy for the middle of the book to start separating from the staples. So if you decide to start looking at these, I'd be very careful. That's why I have multiple copies and stuff, right? But there's amazing things in here. The first issue opened up, which if I think was a mistake, but we're 40 years out and it doesn't really matter anymore, is that here they come out with this adult Marvel magazine. They're going to have this on the newsstand. It has a cover price. How much was this thing? I don't know what the cover price was. Anyway, they were much more expensive than a comic book, if you will. And, they're going, we know it's supposed to be heavy metal. And the first thing they did is they had a Stan Lee, John Buscema Silver Surfer story. Yeah, it says 1979 on the back and parts of this. So I'm kind of wondering, how much was this? That's amazing. I wonder how $2. Excuse me. It's right on the top. These were $2 in 1989, right? 1980, I mean. That's amazing because this would probably be like a $10 book now. So that's like spending $10 back then. But the first thing to do is they give us a very philosophical Stan Lee story. I sort of rolled my eyes when I got this, and I'm like, really? They started out with Stan Lee and John Buscema doing a comic book story with comic book characters when you could be doing like heavy metal stuff. And when you read the story, it's very philosophical. It's really about religion and stuff. It really blew my mind that the Silvers they were on the outskirts of the known universe. This is what I'm saying. These are big ideas out there, big ideas compared to today's comics. Silver Surfer and Galactus are on an asteroid at the edge of the universe. Galactus is trying to tell the Silver Surfer, like, I have the answers. I know what's past everything. Galactus says that he is more than mortal, but he is less than God. And that's the thing about Stan Lee. I've read some poems that he's done over the years. I think there was one on a DVD somewhere. And apparently Stan Lee had very strong religious views. That's how it came across. And I thought it was very interesting that the tone of this comic book story is Galactus acknowledging that there's a God and Silver Surfer trying to find what's past everything. And he ends up traveling forward, going through a black hole, getting his mind blown, and he ends up arriving behind Galactus. He was like, did Galactus get here before me? What's going on here? And Galactus pretty much tells him more or less, God is all. That is why I have the answer. And that's where Silver Surfer says, so the answer of what's beyond everything is within us. Now, you got to wrap your head around that. And this is why I remember the artwork more from Book Illustrated than anything else. They started bringing in Rick Vetch, Steve Bissett, who would end up blowing up and becoming super famous, in my opinion, when they came to Alan Moore's Swamp Thing a few years later. I think they've already worked on Swamp Thing before Alan Moore got there. Who knows? Jim Starlin, who would build up a big fan base with his sci-fi work to begin with Warlock and Captain Marvel, bringing in the negative universe and having him go against Thanos and stuff, really took off as a sci-fi writer in this with the Metamorphosis Odyssey. And that's what cracked me up, because that became Dreadstar. I think it was issue 3 had the first appearance of a character named Dreadstar. And it's a big concept. It's like millions of years in the future. And it's nothing like Earth. Earth may have very well blown up. There's cat head aliens running around that I'm like, did they evolve from cats and stuff? But Dreadstar was sort of like a fantasy, big time fantasy sci-fi odyssey, if you will. And people really went after that issue when they thought there was a Dreadstar movie about to be made. And I'm just sitting here like, people are not enjoying this. The Metamorphosis Odyssey started before issue 3. Oh yeah, the artwork. That's what I mean. The artwork is wonderful through these, right? Then we got issue 2, and like I said, they didn't really have numbers on them. And when they started out, summer 1980, like I said, these came out 4 times a year. The artwork was there. This is a Richard Corbin cover. There's a guy named Tim Conrad who's sort of like a poor man's Richard Corbin in these, right? And I'm being very careful. I may do a video where I just turn the camera down and lay these out on a table and just flip through a few of them. But something that started out as a ripoff, influenced, if you will, by Marvel for their answer to heavy metal, sloped under Archie Goodwin's guidance and all these stories that you were getting from the 70s and 80s by like Charles Best and stuff, where they got to keep their rights. We got to see some very personal stories. And I think that's what the difference is. The layout, the table of contents, it has interviews in them. They talk about some of the stories, the background of the stories before they publish them, and a few of them. And like I said, there's people I never heard of. For some reason, Tim Conrad sounds familiar, but I have no idea who he is. And then you get to see the copyright dates and realize that some of these stories, like there's a few by Charles Best in here that are from the 70s. There's one issue that's got 3 Barry Winslow Smith stories in them. And if you look at the copyright, one was from 1970. Yeah, I mean, it's just this is the feast of the eyes. A lot of people played with the gray tones and the ink wash. It was like artists getting to be artists, being creative. I don't know what their mindset was, but these were big and bold stories told in an anthology series, not made for companies and stuff. Because, like I said, they got to keep their artwork. I think that's what's the most amazing thing is in 1980 here with these books. So you got something special, and it really became its own thing. I really feel like they got away from trying to be heavy metal. And I think it was natural. I don't think it really came off like very organic with what they got in here. One of the stories I liked is that here's one from 1980 by Steve Bissett and Rick Vetch and stuff, right? And you can see shades of what was going to become Swamp Thing with their artwork and stuff. Monkey See. They have a fish monkey in here, which cracked me up because it makes me think of that old those old freak shows. They used to go around Carney style, and you would go into see amazing things in the world, the bearded woman, the fish monkey, or whatever it was, and they actually took a dead monkey, chopped it in half, and put a fish tail to it and sewed it. Well, we kind of get that character. And of course, where this is a magazine, we got to see palettes. Rick Vetch actually like colored that Galactus story in issue #1. I don't know who colored these, but Steve Olaf was involved in it, who became a name. He was one of the first. Christine Skill and Steve Olaf were the first two colorists I ever noticed in comics. Christine Skill, if you want to look at her stuff, go look at the Roy Thomas, John Buscema Avengers run from the mid-'80s. So that's what I mean. Very heavy metal-like, but again, its own thing. Just amazing artwork, amazing colors, and to the point that I really feel like it overshadowed any plots they may or may not have had. Just fantastic stuff. And of course, this is what I'm talking about, like the ambiguous comic strips that ran through heavy metal. They threw a few in here as they went through. But this is where I think it was very different than heavy metal than that I can remember. But I was much more, the articles they had in them, I actually read those, and they were fantasy. They were fantastic. The fantasy of the fantastic in European comics. It's almost like this article here in this was given a nod to heavy metal. You know what I mean? We're going to acknowledge it. That's probably what I think kept this book going for a few other years, is with the fans. They just went ahead and acknowledged it. We're going to talk about some European comics. They knew what they were, to me, it was just, you just acknowledge something and you can move on from it. Hey, this is what we're doing. And this is what I'm saying. Here's some Jim Starlin ink wash work, which I think is just fantastic. Oh, don't want to get kicked off there. Let me find a clean page. There we go. Just fantastic stuff with the artwork. I mean, this is the 4th issue, and this thing just gets more and more amazing as you go through it. I mean, these guys were inspired. This is probably another reason, and all of a sudden color comes in there, sort of a watercolor look. And but this is what I'm saying. These are inspired. These are big, bold stories. This is fantastic. We have some P. Craig Russell stuff, some Elric stuff coming up. We know I'm an Elric fan. I'm currently rereading my Elric stuff. And that was a big influence on this fantasy, heavy metal. Just all sorts of inspired stuff. Pre-Craig Russell, this was probably some of his best work, in my opinion. There we go. So I think you get the idea. Let's see if there's anything else worth moving on here. Yeah, and then of course, I don't know if I was just a person of my era as a kid, even as a kid. Or maybe this is the stuff that influenced me that was around. But we turn around and we get an article about Buck Rogers and Battlestar Galactica of 1980. It was pure sci-fi. It was TV, a little pop culture there. Erin Gray, let's get her picture. There's Erin Gray in this. When I was a kid, and I was curious as a kid, and it was big time curious stuff. I mean, here's a Cylon with one of the purple afro head, I can't remember what they were called, even though I had these toys. Concept art for the shows. They get into D&D with the TSR has advertisements in these. And here's Howard Chaykin. Howard Chaykin popped up in here. Howard Chaykin's story and art and all sorts of things. And like I said, I feel like some of these may have been reprinted elsewhere where they got to keep the art. So you can get these. I think there was like 34 made. You can check me on that. Pick them up here and there. And I think you're going to get a couple hours of good reading and rereading out of them and just looking at the art. Like I said, it was the art that I found out that I remembered, even though I read a bunch of these as a kid here and there. What we got here? Okay, Paulo Costa there, Epic Illustrated. Oh, yeah, that's right. Yeah. Viceroy Siggs. Kid Ragnarok. The only issue of Epic Illustrated I have is #7. Has a sweet it's coming up. Barry Windsor Smith cover. Definitely interesting. I'm planning on getting more someday. I'd get on it. I would really get on it. I'm not saying these are going to take off. Some of these issues are worth a little bit of money here and there, just depending where you buy them. I got a majority of these for $20 at Heroes Con. And I'll talk about them as I go through there. And there's very few in here I've actually had for years. The ones I had fell apart with my Muppet magazines. And my Muppet magazines, it kind of goes Epic Illustrated, Heavy Metal, Muppet magazine. They just fell apart. The magazines had such thin paper that they just separated real easy. I mean, there's no wonder that some of these might be worth money. But if I were you, I'd really get on picking up an issue here and there. With the way comics are and more people that I know in the real life getting back issues more than real comics, I think it's just a matter of time before people start going after more of the magazines. Will it happen? It could. Do I guarantee it? Absolutely not. But I really wouldn't wait around. Like I said, they're so fragile getting a good copy. I think people who collect these will keep them. That's what I'm getting at. I can't imagine giving these up. I put these right with like my Watchmen and my Swamp Thing and that stack of comic books that got me started when I was 4 and 5 years old. You know, this would go in the box of if there's a fire, I'm taking them out. Let's see what we got here. Paulo Costa, The Metamorphosis Odyssey is a story that predates Dreadstar. The character debuts in part 5. Yeah, I think there's more than one chapter in each book of the Metamorphosis Odyssey. I think it ran, who knows? I'm not going to guarantee it because, like I said, I remember the art better than anything. But I think the Metamorphosis Odyssey might have ran through at least the first year. Here we go. Paulo Costa again. The magazine has the stuff that will never be reprinted, including loads of short stories. The art, that's what I'm saying. The artists, the people who did the books got to keep the rights. This isn't, there's not going to be an omnibus of Epic Illustrated out, thus the magazines. The serialized stuff ended up disappearing anyway, like the Sacred and the Profane or Generation Zero. Generation Zero, yeah. that's the one that, that gets me here. Oh, wow. Jared Osborne, I discovered Epic number 2, 1980, when I was 14 and on vacation in Lake Placid, New York. It blew my mind. Absolutely. And I'm going to say this, the rise of Epic Illustrated, the magazine, in my opinion, when it comes to quality and what was going on, really crossed over with the decline of heavy metal, in my opinion. I think heavy metal from 77 to about 82 or 83 are the years to get heavy metal. After that, my memory and maybe 1 or 2 issues I have, it really ended up becoming more and more like PORN, if you will. I don't want the YouTube people to bot me and hear words like that. Now, like I said, as the book went on, Archie Goodwin is a guy who I really need to do a video on sometime. Archie Goodwin books, his name, he was the editor behind the Starman books by James Robinson. He did the shadow line of, I think he was behind Epic Illustrated to begin with. Epic that turned into, we got the Epic line of comics of creator-owned books and things like that. I think Archie Goodwin had the ability to bring out the best of the people that worked for him on their books and art. I don't know. I mean, he's somebody I really need to look into more. But I always liked Archie Goodwin comics that he actually wrote here and there. Out of the New Universe books that came out, his Justice was pretty cool, you know. Hey, Comics for Thomas, what's up? Kid Ragnarok, duly noted. Just happened to get my issues on the cheap. Guess I'll keep an eye out during my usual back issue digging. You can't ask much more than that. And Paulo Costa, wait, you can do this in comics? Isn't that right, Jared? That's funny. Ross Sanders is there. Hey, what's up, Ross? So this is probably one of my favorite issues right here. I lost track of what number we are, but this is winter of 1980. And all of a sudden they started bringing in things and they really turned up some of the sci-fi and the things that I was into, right? Robert E. Howard story. Okay, we know who Robert E. Howard is, the Conan stuff. Harlan Ellison stuff. Harlan Ellison is a big comic book guy. It was not the first time his stuff showed up in comics, EC Comics and things like that. Michael Moorcock and many more. So now we're getting like these labors of love. I think this is a Mike Kaluta cover. Don't quote me on that. I might look at it here. All right, so winter of 1980. And this is where I really feel like with what I've read that we started getting Epic Illustrated becoming its own thing slowly, the first shades of it. Here's a movie I've never heard of, The Awakening by Charlton Heston. Anybody know this movie? Um, Yeah, a little corrections. We started getting painted work by Jim Starlin. The Odyssey kept continuing, the Metamorphosis Odyssey. We had a Dread Star in there proper. And this stuff was just fantastic. It's just the way to go. We started getting articles on artists we've never heard of in America. The art of Ishimori. Shotaro Ishimori. Apparently, we got some manga going on here when it was really kind of starting to enter America, I think, in my opinion. People were aware of it, but it was starting to become a little bit more mainstream by my memory around here. So we were starting to get profiles and stuff, right? And then we get more, Elric of Millibone. Sounds French and stuff. We got more pre-Craig Russell now. I love this stuff, right? And this is what I'm saying. What came first? Did this magazine influence some of my interest, or was I already there? I already know the answer. I was already there. This stuff just fueled the fire. I'm like, oh, cool. I'd already been, flipping through Elric books here and there, not understanding quite what I was reading, but I understood Elric and the concept of the sword and everything of Stormbringer. And then all of a sudden, here it is in comic book form. That blew me away. I thought I was the only one that knew Elric in this house that I grew up in. Just fantastic stuff, man. And this stuff is timeless. Some of this stuff feels as fresh today as it did 40 years ago. And I've met P. Craig Russell and been able to have him sign a few things and had some small talks here as much as you can at Baltimore Comic Con, if you will. It's just fantastic stuff. And then they've got some weird stuff. Some of these articles and some of these cartoons I feel like I was reading a Playboy. I had a stack of Playboys I kept under the trailer out of curiosity, not out of titillation. So I was really sort of like doing that. And then we got into some Neil Adams stuff, continuity graphics out of his studio. So you ended up getting Neil Adams in there, which was just fantastic. Started getting to see, oh my goodness, created by Larry Hama, Bucky O'Hare. Yeah, I heard about Bucky O'Hare years later, so I know I had this issue as a kid. This is probably one of the ones that made me think this magazine is really good. Bucky O'Hare ended up only have 2 comics from Bucky O'Hare, and that was from the late 80s at Continuity Studios owned by Neil Adams there. So out of this book, you started really seeing seeds for the future. Steve Bissett, Rick Veitch, Bucky O'Hare. I mean, just, anything and everything. There's also one of these that has a, Almanac, episode 3, based on Robert E. Howard by this Tim Conrad dude. Tim, this is the only place I've ever heard of this Tim Conrad dude that I can think about. And if you get trivia, they talk a little bit about the stories. Like this is from a story from apparently 1938. No, wait a minute, from the Journal of Professor Avery Hildebrand, 1938. And then it talks about Robert E. Howard before his untimely death by suicide in 1936. It goes into some of Robert E. Howard stuff. This is how I ended up getting some of this encyclopedic knowledge I've been told I have just from reading the thing sticking, actually reading all of this stuff. It's just fantastic. Like I said, the colors that popped, the things that were on there, pulling out stuff from Robert E. Howard that, not King Cole, not Red Sonja, just big labors of love in here. I mean, when was the last time you saw something as simple as an establishing shot, in a comic book that was this glorious? The colors. I mean, the high def camera here is not going to do this justice. So I really recommend getting those. Yeah, pick me out a few. Pterodactyls floating around. And this is the art that I love. I've always loved this ink wash soft look that they have in here. I mean, the stories like this were the ones that stuck out. Colors popping at you, big and brighter, just fantastic. But then it's like this black and white stuff set a mood when I was a kid. It felt like I was looking at actual art, and I could feel a very serious tone come across me. And to me, that's when you know it's actual art, because you get a reaction out of people. And it looks so simplistic. All right. So simplistic. Now, I remember reading somewhere Archie Goodwin did an editorial one of these. I remember him acknowledging Harvey magazines, Warren Publications, things like that, which he worked at as well. And it was kind of that's what I mean to acknowledge it and to kind of act like that there's like this history and this path with these adult magazines that were able to escape the comic code authority. Where they're Indian stuff. I mean, some of the stuff is just out there. Here's our Harlan Ellison story with artwork by Ken Stacy, Sleeping Dogs. I remember reading this. Yeah, I've definitely had this issue as a kid. All black and white and stuff. And I do remember thinking, okay, you got this story over here with all the color. This is the one that really should have had some color to it. And you're making it black and white. I remember getting frustrated and mad, like you guys made the wrong choice. I mean, in my mind, I was like, come on. Great stuff. Great stuff. Shades of Tony Harris there. That looks like that could have came right out of a 1990 Starman comic with Michael, the blue Starman, the actual alien. Uh-oh, hold on. We became unplugged. But yeah, this I can definitely see having, like I said, this is probably one of the ones that I flipped through a whole lot when I was about 9 years old, and I remember this panel very well. So there's no telling how this influenced other people that read it. Oh man. Okay, so we might do a few more here. What do we got here? Oh man. Okay, backing up, Jared Osborne. Jared Osborne actually was it the bullpen you worked in at Marvel, Jared, in the 90s. He's got a video where MTV on Jared Osborne's channel. He's got a video on MTV from MTV Music Television where they came into the Marvel bullpen, and Jared's in there. I think he got interviewed in part of it. But Jared Osborne says, I've never met Archie Goodwin, but everybody I know who met and worked with him loved him. He's one of those guys like John Romita who no one has a bad word about. That's fantastic. That's great to hear that, for real. Kroll. Okay. Comics for Thomas is slowly putting together an epic illustrated run. I think I need like maybe 4 issues, and the last one's very hard to find. It has an Alan Moore story in it, I believe. Ross Sanders, any nudity? Yes, which is kind of why I'm taking my time when I do pull out an issue that's sparking my head. Yeah, there's nudity in there. I've actually already showed a little bit there by accident. Jared Osborne. I still remember P. Craig Russell's excellent pencil drawings and beauty without the beloved is like a sword through the heart. I still remember that title all these years later. Oh, that's fantastic. I totally get what you're saying when you hear something like that and it sticks. There's an issue of Epic Illustrated, and I'm wondering if it's the same one that you're talking about, but there's an issue here where they took P. Craig Russell's pencils and just put them straight down. And it actually looks like he used a pencil to put in the words and captions and things himself and stuff. It's a beautiful piece of work. Maybe I can remember which issues it's in. And I wonder if that's the same one. Kid Ragnarok, this looks fantastic. It is. Like I said, for you guys that are popped in, I don't even know where it's at now. But I had a Marvel book that I didn't know if I wanted to talk about or not. And I couldn't finish it. And it made me sort of start longing for when comic books were big, bold, creative, and just so much better. Trying to read this that I couldn't finish ended up me digging these out. I was like, I can't take this. It's so horrible. Or bad language and sex, drug use heavy. Not really. That may be the difference. I talked earlier here about sometimes when I read heavy metal, it'd be like hugging barbed wire as much as I love the magazine. I never really got that with this. This is definitely a bit more tone. It's softer. It's softer. I think you're safe doing this. This is more. That's why I'm showing the books. It turned into more sci-fi, sort of philosophical, a lot of fantasy. It's almost like I could say, we'll go through. Paulo Costa, Ken Stacy had one problem. It took him forever to draw a story. Gotcha. Jared Osborne, I have every issue from 2 until the till the end after I found issue 2. I was at the newsstand every month looking for it. Now around here, I don't think every issue was on the newsstand when I was growing up. It was sporadic, and usually you went in and you looked at the spinner rack. You know, you're gonna remember I'm a kid here. Looked at the spinner rack, um, the drugstores and the Magic Mart and things like that, where they had the spinner racks I could buy them from. They didn't have heavy metal and stuff, right? Usually that ended up being head shops or some gas station when you went out of town. So I don't know how so many of these got in my house. I wasn't the one buying them. I did buy one issue there that I do remember, and I'll show it. It's later on. John Jones, what comic series do you wish you read as a kid but didn't until you became an adult? Wow, that's a interesting question out there. What comic series do you wish you read as a kid but didn't until you were an adult? I'm gonna go off the top of my head. This will probably change, but I'm gonna go with Strike Force Morituri. I remember seeing the ads in the comics. I thought it was pretty cool to look at. I'm gonna have to go with that one probably. I'm trying to remember if there's anything else. Omega the Unknown. That's another one. That came out in the late 70s when I was probably like in kindergarten or before. I have to look at the year of that, before that. Probably that one, and probably I'm trying to think of anything that was on the stands that I wished I'd read when it came out. But yeah, I'm gonna go Strike Force Morituri and Omega the Unknown. What comics, Jared Jones? It was the Marvel Bullpen from 1990 to 2005. Fantastic. Thank you, Jared. Eric Breen, Ingleton auctioned a set of Strike Force Morituri books last night. Yeah, where I couldn't sleep, I actually chimed in there and made one comment, but nobody noticed. Everybody was like all business and stuff. But it was when I jumped in there when the Batgirl books were on auction, and I left a little funny comment I thought was hilarious. But yeah, the Strike Force Morituri books, I'm not saying that they're classics, but they're very interesting reads, in my opinion. Heavy sci-fi. Strike, for you guys that don't know, there's an alien invasion. And what really grabbed me about the book is I'm about 2 hours from Roanoke, Virginia. That's the new coast in this book and set in the future. An alien invasion has come on, and to fight the aliens, they recruit people to give them superpowers, but you want to die within a year. The powers actually kill you. Eric Breen, my apologies. I was supposed to be watching the chat. Oh, you're fine. It's not a big deal. Not a big deal. Scott Neely, Alien Legion was a comic I tried as a kid but couldn't get into then. That's cool because I have 1 or 2 issues, I don't know, like a special or something of Alien Legion. I really want to read it there. All right, guys, let me set this to the side. I don't want to, like I said, these books can be fragile because of the paper, so I'll be taking an extra second. All right. Again, another great issue here, and I think this has like... that's what I mean. These things have so many little stories, short stories in them and stuff. But here's one. I think this is issue 5. This is probably the 5th issue. We're going into 1981. We got the Hildebrandt brothers in here doing the artwork. There's a big, I think there's a big, couple page interview with them. But it's so funny because it's laid out like a Playboy, the way Playboy used to lay out their interviews. I think in there, I think we started getting some Charles Vest stories. Charles Vest, this is before he was a name. And the copyright dates are in the 70s, I think, if I remember right. And then I kind of saw this one around because this one's actually in Mylar, but Epic Illustrated. This is one of the ones that fell apart. Okay. I carried this one around for years. It literally fell apart. I think it had like Hardee's coupons for their biscuits in it. You could get inside of this. And I always wondered why it was so hard to run across this because it's a Neil Adams cover that came up. A special sci-fi issue featuring Harlan Ellison's Life Hutch. And this is what I'm saying. This is like, as Epic went along, it really started getting more of its identity. And in my head, as I read them and as I sort of remember some of the refugees of the 60s and 70s, collecting magazines like 1984, Heavy Metal, of course, 1984 became 1985. I think Omni magazine of all things was popping up, and that was like straight science. It was actually a magazine about science and stuff. It really started becoming its own thing, despite having traditional more and more traditional comic book people on here that you knew, you were starting to see a different side of them. You got to understand what you knew is what you saw on the rack. There was very amazing heroes was starting up. You didn't have access to fanzines. You're seeing new stuff that just excited you. And this is another one I carried around. I have the original and I have the upgrade here, right? But this is the one with Barry Windsor Smith. His heavy detail, his psychedelic coloring at the time, and his detailed distortion of like faces and stuff. It was one of those things where I was like, this guy Mapro is the same way. Bad faces, everybody looked alike, in my opinion, and stuff, right? But this is 1981 of August. So this thing came out during the summer. That makes sense. Probably like June or July. This came out probably in June of 1981, and this was what I spent my summer flipping through, back and forth. It was just amazing. I'm gonna show some insides here. Scott Neely Playboy. Is that a comic for Game Boy? How funny. Scott Neely. I remember when I first heard the PlayStation was going to make a portable game system, I asked my friend, will they call it Playboy? I realized what I said after he laughed nonstop. It became Game Boy. You were pretty close. John C. What's up out there? Good to see you. Kid Ragnarok, and Jared Osborne. 1984 or 1994 as it was renamed. Thank you, Jared. Was not a very good magazine when I tried an issue out sometimes in the early 1980s. Now, there's a lot of those magazines that came out, and it was such I'll never remember all the magazines that came out. That was like black and white, sci-fi and stuff. And there's a reason to not remember. It may have been 1984, it may not have been. There was some other stuff. But I remember seeing this fantastic artwork in it. And one was a lady. I don't know if it was Barbarella inspired or whatever was going on. But I remember putting it up because she rode around with an alien, but the alien was there to be a sex bot with her, if you will. And it just sort of like, even as a kid, I was like, oh man, this looks great. This could have been fantastic. And it basically turned into PORN, So, and I was like, God, like I said, different time, different era. You could put those things up, but seriously, that stuff just really kind of like turned me off. I just moved on to something. I wanted action and adventure, aliens and Star Wars. And it was Star Wars that really pushed a lot of these magazines, in my opinion. Scott Neely became PSP, but this was during the time of Game Boy. That's why I called it that. Oh, that's amazing. All right, let me see if I can figure out which one is the old copy. Yeah, that one's got a little rip in it, so we'll go with this one. Now, like I said, I could not believe that this was, I took the board out too, man. I could not believe that this was the same Barry Windsor Smith that I was reading old Avengers books that Stepdad or somebody had. I couldn't believe this is the same guy because a lot of his stuff looked heavily Kirby influenced. I remember reading an article around the Valiant era or the Defiant era or something where he said that they would pass around the Jack Kirby picture, Jack Kirby pages and tell everybody to draw like this and stuff, right? So for him to become his own, artist, it's just amazing. I mean, if there's anybody that has a distinctive visual, I think it's this guy and Brian Boland when they do their artwork, they have the colors in mind for their art. There's only two guys that really pop out in my head like that. And like I said, I spent the summer, this is the actual one. Check that out. Heavy Metal in Epic Illustrated. That's for the movie. Coming in August, and this is 1981. So there we go. So that's what I mean. This is a huge movie. I was there from day one with this movie. I got to see it. I got the bootleg. I still have the VHS tape that's bootlegged of Heavy Metal. I, of course, have it on DVD, and I've had it on VHS. I've got the actual Heavy Metal magazine cover issue with that cover on here. And this one we have Story and Art Holocaust by Story and Art by Neil Adams. Denny O'Neil comes in on this one. Pepe Moreno came in. Barry Windsor Smith, A Vision and Quest by Archie Goodwin. The Egg by Tim Caldwell. Never heard of this. That's what I'm saying. Steve Grant is in here. I think one, hopefully you know that name. John Bolton is in here. Joe Duffy is in here. Wendy Penny has worked on Epic Illustrated too, if you're a fan of them. So this is just fantastic stuff. And of course, as of the era, we have, ads. Here we go. What I was talking about, ads for Dungeons and Dragons. That might be some Bill Willingham work for all I know. Bill Willingham worked at TSR before he got into Comico and Vertigo comics and stuff. I'm not going to go on a tirade there. You had the official Star Wars fan club going on that you could join. That's what I mean. Just looking at these are just fantastic. And then we get into the Neil Adams story. And I think this is the one. There's a Neil Adams story somewhere. I got to be careful because it actually shows a naked lady giving birth, and she gives birth to the earth. Big ideas, big concepts and stuff, right? And, Vietnam. I mean, look at this, man. Look at this. I mean, this isn't Neil Adams, but doesn't matter who this artist is. Tell me that doesn't grab you. Tell me that couldn't be a poster on your wall or an old school beer commercial. Just fantastic stuff. Oh, great stuff, man. Like, I could just get lost in this stuff. Oh, we got a big article with some fantastic Barry Windsor Smith art. Like I said, it was the detail. Come on and focus. There we go. It was the detail of Barry Windsor Smith art, how he get all that detail. I mean, I really looked at it. And I'm like, how does he do it? How do you even start something like that? Oh, good stuff. Good stuff. Let me bag this back up. Might change out these magazine bags. Some of these are starting to feel a little bit old. So, and here's another one that I had, right? An upgrade and another one that I followed around, the Last Centaur story. I kind of remember some of the stories in this one, but it had a Weird World story in it. And Weird World, what I like about this is that, again, this is probably where I got some of my comic book knowledge there, if you will. But Weird World is a concept. It was highly inspired by Lord of the Rings. Don't get me wrong; it's two little elves instead of two little hobbits and stuff. But it was by Doug Munch and Mike Plug, and they give you all the back issues to go track down for the other Weird World stories before they started in on the new one. You'd get introductions and backgrounds. They would catch you up. And there's a Charles Vess story I was talking about. So you come in here, and I mean, you talk about having a flashback. I mean, I remember this like yesterday. The Weird World stuff I loved. You get a chart. What was really cool is I was born to play D&D in the 80s because Commandy had a world map. Weird World had a map. I mean, you threw a map in there and I was there. You know what I mean? I'm like, I read maps up until my 30s just for fun and stuff, right? So to have these was fantastic. And I remember coming up with ideas for D&D and role-playing. I would draw maps. But John Mishima came in here, and this is some of his most inspired stuff. And like I said, this is what I'm talking about. The pages will separate very easy. But luckily, I could probably like frame this, and I would hang this up. The artwork, the coloring. I mean, they really need to go back and look at this stuff and throw some of this into modern comics. Where's that Charles Vess story? Yeah. Yeah, 1981 by Charles Vess, Children of the Stars. Some early Charles Vess before. I don't really remember anybody knowing Charles Vess until that Web of Comics, Web of Spider-Man cover. His Spider-Man stuff is where I think people really started knowing who he was. And then, of course, he got with Neil Gaiman on a few issues of Sandman, talking the Shakespeare stories and stuff, right? So it's really cool to see some of the earlier stuff. And of course, we get some stuff from 1970 with this guy, Clay Wilson and stuff. We get some of that underground comics drug stuff from back in the day, Crumb inspired. So like I said, a little bit of history lessons here. And this is the one. Here is the story, Isolation and Illusion, 1981. The story of P. Craig Russell, where it's just his complete pencils. And this thing is beautiful. Like I said, these are the two issues I remember very well. Very, very well. So that is December of 1981. Okay. So I think you kind of get the idea here. I mean, I've got a ton of these to look at here. I might just show some of the covers. Edward, let me see what we got here. Man, you guys have been talking. Okay, Scott Neely. Okay, back on topic. Anyone here remember one of these magazines that had a story where some Halo-looking soldiers were fighting until Ghost started removing their armor when the narrator got attacked? Kid Ragnarok. Good Lord, I love that cover. Probably about the Barry Windsor Smith one. We're talking about that story. Jared, the Spanish studio that produced the 1994 magazine, was telling the artist to be as vulgar as possible to increase sales. I'm not surprised. I really think it had an opposite effect, obviously. And that's what I'm saying. That's one of the reasons I kind of dropped off of heavy metal just organically. I never really made a decision. I just sort of didn't want to pick it up anymore. Edward, the art in 1994 was good, but the writing was pretty hackneyed. I'm pretty sure Harlan Ellison actually brought a lawsuit against Warren for plagiarizing the story of Boy and His Dog. Yeah, it wouldn't surprise me a bit. Harlan Ellison's on top of that stuff. He actually reads comics and magazines and stuff. There's a cool story about when he called up the publisher, William Gaines, at EC Comics and had a friendly conversation with him. And it was like, oh, by the way, I think you guys forgot to send my royalty check. That'll be $250. They're like, oh, yeah, sorry about that. So EC Comics would just start doing Harlan Ellison stories, and they would just send them $250. This is back in the 50s. Paulo Costo, I think they're still talking about 1984, 1994. By the time most of the artists were saving their best work for a Spanish magazine called Samac. Oh, Paulo laying some knowledge on us here over there from across the pond. It was halfway between heavy metal and Epic Illustrated. Oh, that's interesting. Kid Ragnarok. Okay, I'm going to have to go dig out my copy of issue 7. Enjoy Kid Ragnarok. Jared Osborne. I pull all my epics. I put all my epics in Mylar a few years ago. That's how much I love them. They're fantastic, Jared. I'm right there with you. Edward2962. I'm not sure if anyone's mentioned it yet, but it's kind of interesting that Epic had all those ads for cigarettes and Yukon Jack. Yeah, maybe that's what makes me feel like there's like a little Playboy thing, man. I remember seeing was it Crown Royal or something, but seeing some of those old ads in old magazines like this. You got the feathered hair, mustached couples with the nice clothes, or you would see like this city that was completely flat and it was night, you just see all the lights. And I'm like, that's not New York. And it turned out to be like Dallas or something, Texas. Then Urban Cowboy came out around this time. Scott Neely, anyone know where I can find out what epic heavy metal magazine I had as a kid? Were there any short bios? You're just gonna have to do a Google search, Scott. Welcome to the hunt. I would say comic book DB, but they're gone. They're gone. They used to have little synopsis and who worked on what books and what the little stories were, and where they were always in other places you could find the same story reprinted and stuff. Okay, so we hit the third anniversary of Epic here in 1982, which is what makes me think that this actually started in late 79, but the cover dates were probably 2 or 3 months ahead of the 1980 actual year. So, here it is from April 1982. You take away 2 months. So this is, February 1982. I'm just making sure because I'm live here. But the third anniversary issue here, Harlan Ellison's Run from the Stars. Okay. And I love this because this cover is so cool. You don't realize that's a helmet. You think it's just some statue like in some pyramid down in South America or something, and it turns out it's an actual helmet. Things started getting really cool. Miranda the She-Wolf by Chris Claremont and John Bolton. And I'm almost 99% positive this is when I had to do a double take when that graphic novel came out. They actually took the story out of this and made it into a Marvel graphic novel when they started doing those, like, the New Mutants Marvel graphic novel, Death of Captain Marvel, that line of books there that came out sporadically through the 80s and stuff. They pulled it right out of this. And like I said, I'm just going over, there's great things in all of these if I really opened them up. That's what's amazing about this book. You can just read and reread them and go through them. Abrax and the Earthman by Rick Veitch is something that in my mind as a kid should have been in heavy metal because it's so out there. Rick Veitch, his artwork and his story ideas and concepts that are in these are just out there. And they're fantastic, every one of them. We continue with Miranda the She-Wolf, and weird worlds going through there. And like I said, this is when they were starting. To me, this is when Epic finally. You didn't think about heavy metal. To me, they had surpassed heavy metal by this time, just by their timing. Just by their timing. Oh man, I'm gonna be reading this. Okay, now this one's interesting. This is August of 1982. Now, what was it? I did a video on it a couple years ago. I was at Heroes Con and I got Arthur Pseudonym to sign this. Arthur Pseudonym, for a lot of you new guys, you probably may or may not remember him from doing the covers for the Marvel Zombies. He would take a classic Marvel cover and zombie fight and stuff, right? But for me, I remember this guy from like when I was seriously like at 6, 7 years old when he did Mudwog. Mudwog was really interesting art-wise. I can't really tell you too much of the plot. It took place in the swamp. It had naked women, not naked goddess women, giant women. He drew the back of legs and the back of the calf and the foot a whole lot for an establishing shot. The guy was like an artist, right? So he comes into this one and he gets something that's very, Mudwog-like. But my whole point of remembering his artwork is I love Sam Keith. I love his Sandman work. I love the Max. I love the Max cartoon stuff, but the man owes a nod or a check to Arthur Pseudonym. If you read Mudwog or the stuff that's in here, you're going to see tons and tons and tons of what he did in the Max, right down to the Outback and stuff, right? So anyway, I get Arthur Pseudonym to sign this one, and before he signs it, he starts flipping through it. And he comes upon this article, Blade Runner from Film to Comic. For you guys that were at the beginning of the video, that's one of the reasons I flipped this out here. I talked about this at the beginning of the video, my Blade Runner, the original Marvel Super Special Blade Runner and stuff. Well, here's the article talking about it coming out and Al Williamson work. Well, Arthur Pseudonym grabbed this, started flipping through it and reading them. And it was really odd because I got to become Howler Mouse, giving him a little history on Blade Runner and a little history on Al Williamson. The guy was a huge fan, but it's like we both became fans. Got to come behind the table. We sat down and we talked. And it was just two guys who loved comic books talking about this stuff. And it was really cool. And he signed it, but he didn't do the cover. He did a story in here. So I don't know what happened. So this is just fantastic stuff, right? I was talking about Rick Veitz's designs and stuff. Look at all this. The coloring, that stuff will put a dent in your brain. Just to give you an idea. And like in the anthology series, Praying Mantis, my favorite insect. There are characters in here. I mean, this thing is just outrageous and out there. It's crazier than a Philip Jose Farmer book. Gigantic whales coming after them, eating their little planet if they don't watch. Gigantic red space whales. I mean, this stuff was just amazing that was out there. You never knew where it was going. And then we get they started just, getting art and showing it to you. That's what I mean. You can just look at this just the effort put into this stuff. It's just amazing. Oh, wow. All right. I'll set that down. We're going to move on here. But that's the Arthur Pseudonym story. He was also in it. Of course, more Elric stuff. This is another one of the issues that I was able to have in my house. I may have actually bought this one myself. It's 1982. But, yeah, I think I might have bought this one myself. I'm not sure. Then we just got it, turned way up, man. Richard Corbin, Boris Vallejo. An all-new series of The Last Dragons. I think that's by Carl Potts. The book became sturdier, and it definitely had its own sense of identity, and they played around with what they were doing. It just seems like this book was just clicking. The artwork's coming in, experimental little stories like this. This is the stuff that I want to see back in comics. People experimenting with storytelling and having it really click and play around. Oh, this stuff is just so good. Just sitting here watching me. Here's some Boris. And there's a story here somewhere in one of these where Joe Jusko, for you guys that know him, he did painted covers for Savage Sword of Conan magazines and stuff. He did a famous She-Hulk poster on the beach where she's lifting weights and stuff. He actually did pencils in one of these stories. It was really cool. Okay. And then again, here's the issue, man. 3 stories by Barry Winslow Smith, where we finally really get to see what he's doing. I think the 3 stories span between 1970 to 82. There's no continuity to them. They're just little short stories for him. And his stuff is not going to show up on camera very well. So if you want to look this up, this is February 1983 of Epic Magazine. But this is one of the first times that I remember Marvel Comics acknowledging Cerebus. One of the stories he had is with a Conan-like character from the early years of Cerebus. And I'd have to go there and read about it, but it's nothing really big. It's like maybe 2 or 3 pages, and it reads like a comic strip in a way. But Barry Winslow Smith, his Conan stuff with Roy Thomas, influenced Dave Sim. They did, Cerebus started out. The first 25 issues are a parody of Conan. So all of a sudden, Barry Winslow Smith is doing a nod to Cerebus in this, right? And Barry Winslow Smith there was a Cerebus jam. So it's been 2 issues, but I think just 1 issue came on, is where Dave Sim let other artists do little short stories or something on Cerebus. And the way that Barry Winslow Smith drew Cerebus, like his arms and stuff, they changed the way Dave Sim drew Cerebus and stuff. So a lot of the stuff will lead to other things. Speaking of Cerebus, I'm reading Rick's story finally. Almost done reading the complete 300 issues consecutively. Anyway, that's funny for that to be sitting there. Okay, so what we got here. Scott Neely says he's done Google searches and they've come up fruitless. You're going to have to find comic book sites and then dig on the comic book sites. Charlie and Flytrap and Jared Arthur Pseudonym. Yeah, they're fantastic, man. Fantastic. And as Jared was saying, I think it was Jared came up, or Paulo. One of the guys here is Generation Zero by Pepe Moreno, The Wanderer by Mike Kaluta, and The Conclusion of Abrax and the Earthman by Rick Veitch and stuff, right? So some of these stories did have an end. They were able to hang in there. The anthology series were good. And a lot of these stories will, just like someone already pointed out, they will not be collected here, right? Chris Claremont, John Bolton really came over here. There's ads and stuff for Chris Claremont's graphic novel of Man Loves, God Kills. Some of them, and I really think they got by. I like to think that Epic Illustrated may have been the one where they realized how big of an adult audience they have. Not just the college kids, but that's pure speculation on my part. They started bringing in more and more people. Jim Steranko came on there. I think this is a Steranko. Yeah. Jim Steranko cracks me up because he always draws himself into the characters and the covers. That's what Jim Steranko probably looked like at the time in the face. Okay. So we started getting more and more people in here. Portfolios are Robert Gould, Jeffrey Jones. That's who I was trying to think of. Alan Lee, Barry Winslow Smith. Just fantastic stuff. August of 83. We're in the 83 now, 1983. The Conclusion of The Last Dragons. I'm not going to open this up. Believe it or not, I think I'm just now realizing this is one issue of Epic Magazine, Epic Illustrated, that I may not have ever read. I'm wondering how these next 2 issues, I wonder how they slid by. I don't know. I never got around to reading these 2. Here's the ads we were talking about. You knew it was an alcohol ad if it had polar bears and ice caps back in the day. The Sacred and Profane, More Generation Zero, Sunstroke by Mike Kaluta. I can't say anything. Somehow I have not read these 2 issues. I don't know if I got them separate or what was going on. Full color, Miranda the She-Wolf. Oh, man. It's fantastic stuff here. Wizard Mask by Chris Claremont and John Bolton. And then we get into something that I was really glad to start actually noticing these on newsstands. I don't know what happened in the town that I grew up in. These things weren't behind the counters, but I do remember there was a gas station that opened and it had the magazine rack that you can go to. And it had the Chicks on Motorcycle magazines. There might have been 1 or 2 tattoo magazines. Don't take my word on that. And I looked up and there's Heavy Metal, Playboy, Penthouse, not covered up by or anything, not sealed in wrappers or stuff. And This is when you know you're a comic book collector or whatever. You pass all that stuff up and you're like, it's Epic Illustrated. And I'm just in time for Bon and Mark Boday's stuff to start popping up. Baudet was an underground artist, had a huge following in the 70s. If you ever seen Ralph Bakshi's Wizards, it's based off of his artwork and stuff. And his brother took over after his death with a few things. And these stories just blew me away as a kid. I've actually ended up picking up some of the trades and stuff. We get the character's name right. I'm live. I'm not about to sit here and get it wrong. Okay, this starts out with the Cheech Wizard, right? I don't know if these are reprints or anything, but the Cheech Wizard, these are old head shop comics, drug influence a little bit. Talks about, try to be political, the lizard and the Cheech Wizard and stuff. But they ended up bringing up his Necron 99 stuff. I think it's what it was called. Started coming in there. So I was very glad to get those. Man, I'm getting lost in these books. I better just keep trucking along there. Yeah, the last Galactus story. Filter, I'm about to get into that. We're going to move along. And for you guys that were talking about Alien Legion, there you go. That's Alien Legion for you guys out there. Fantastic. James Bond role-playing games, which I wished I never got rid of. I had a box or two of that. Like I said, even, this was just good stuff. Yeah, there's my original. I have 2 issues of this. So this one's probably my original since it's not in its own bag. And then Charlton 66. Now, when I picked up, I told him about picking up the Epic Illustrated or something, or we've had many talks and stuff. Charlton 66, go check out his channel. He's a real good friend. After we went to Baltimore Con one year, and I may be misremembering this stuff, but I didn't find this book. And I actually had passed it up because I thought I had it before, and apparently I didn't. Maybe I read it back in the day. But this is the beginning of the last Galactus story. Epic Illustrated, October 1984. This might be the 26th issue. This is in Mylar. I think it's a Sinkovich cover. It is 1984. But that's Nova and Galactus on there. I know you might be able to make out his face right there. But this is when John Byrne came on here writing and drawing I think it's some of his best artwork, and Terry Austin inking. They went on and they ended up doing what was going to be the last Galactus story. You talk about this magazine popping amongst people who at this time, I'm like 11, 12 years old, and I'm getting more aware and walking out into town a lot more by myself and stuff like that. And people are talking about this. But he's come in and this is the last Galactus story. It's set so far in the future that Galactus doesn't feel that he needs to keep his oath to Reed Richards to not eat the earth, stay away from it. And he ends up eating the earth. Nova takes him there. The landscape is totally alien. It's beautiful. It influenced some of my artwork I was doing at the time, just to be honest, looking back on it. And he eats the earth. And he's like, I knew that was the prime jewel of the universe. I just knew it because apparently it was good. And I think there's like galaxies dying and stuff, right? And we know, as it's called, the last Galactus story, now that we live in an era where you get a miniseries of the end of X-Men, the end of Wolverine, the end of Hulk, the end of Fantastic Four. This was a pretty big deal because this is the finality of it. Unfortunately, I think 9 chapters were completed in Epic Illustrated. The last issue was not. But you can go online, different places, do a Google search, and John Byrne's done interviews where he just said what happened. And I've actually seen some of the pages, probably on John Byrne's website, John Byrne Robotics or something. I've actually seen some of the pages, which I was like, it just took 30 years, but I got to finish it. So the ending is out there and it's amazing. And to be honest with you, there's a lot of great stuff in here, but the last Galactus story sort of overshadowed all of that. So from issue number 1, where you had Stan Lee and the Silver Surfer and Galactus in there, the one that really made this magazine pop, in my opinion, was that last Galactus story and John Byrne. His Byrne victims being like, we must have it. Cobalt 60, not Necron 99, Cobalt 60. I probably have another copy of this. But the Von Bode stuff in there is what I ended up. I mean, we had the last Galactus story, and that was cool. Don't get me wrong; it hung me in there. But it was this Von Bode stuff, this desolate wasteland. I mean, if you know me, Mad Max, Commandy, End of the World stuff, Barbara Baudet and Mark Baudet, based on characters by Von Baudet. His brother did the artwork, but we're so there. This is the stuff I absolutely loved. And it's like, no doubt in my mind, it's where I watched that Ralph Bakshi Wizards back in 77, 78 at a community college setting. And I absolutely love this story arc. Oh my gosh, it just grabbed me. I got it. I totally got it. But there's Cobalt 60 right there. One of my favorite characters. It was my avatar on Twitter for a long time, you know. So just great stuff going in there. Oh man. And of course, we have more great, fantastic Charles Vess art in here also. It's what I mean, you never know what you're going to find when you open one of these up. Fantastic stuff. Oh, man. Void Indigo. I'm not going to get into that. It's for mature readers. It was a Steve Gerber story, so you know it's a mind trip. I need to revisit that. I got a few issues floating around somewhere that I may or may not have purged. So let me bag this back. I got to be very careful with these. Okay, set that over here. Just out to kill it, here's my Howard the Duck magazine that I thought I lost, but I had just shared a bag with one of my original Epic magazines from the 80s, Mike Kaluta cover. And this has a preview of Sienkiewicz art of the comic books, the adaptations of Dune in 2010. I wished I never got rid of my Dune 3 issues that were on the newsstand, but I do have the Marvel Super Special. John Byrne, Terry Ostwin, Bill Sienkiewicz, and Dave Sim. Now, I think there's 3 or 4 issues. This is probably where I really discovered Cerebus as much as I could back then, without ever seeing the comic or knowing how to get it or anything like that. But Dave Sim and Gerard came in here and they did a few stories of, I think there's like 3 or 4 issues in total. This like these 1, 2, maybe 3-page stories of Cerebus as a kid, Cerebus as a tax collector or something, and another one. But Dave Sim was in there. And Dave Sim in Marvel's history is hilarious because I think Marvel tried to sue him because he did Wolveroach, which was too close to Wolverine. And they retaliated by making a demon named Sim, S-Y-M, that was a rip on Cerebus because he had a black robe, a black robe, a black vest and stuff. Sim ended up popping up. And meanwhile, they're publishing some of his stuff in Epic Illustrated. All this stuff just has this fascinating backstories when you get into it, which is fantastic. And like I said, the big thing on here, it just got to the point where all they had to put on there was the last Galactus story. And that was it. Maybe one or other people, they stopped putting people who were working on the book until this next issue. Now, this next issue, this one hurt. I actually read and reread this book. I didn't realize this was a Bernie Wrightson cover because, it's not exactly a horror cover, if you will. But this was one of the books, 1985. I'm 12 years old by now. I'm reading Cross on the Infinite Earths, and I'm whipping this out. I read this one till it literally disintegrated. I'll look at the cover. I'll try to figure out ways to hang it up. I'm just, I'm 12 years old and I don't know, what I'm doing. But this is June of 1985. This great Barry Windsor Smith cover that I've seen used in other places. And I just read and reread this one. And then I even like the Black Dragon, even this had me fascinated. This magazine really, I swear, I think I was watching MTV, the radio, and this magazine through the whole summer. It was just over and over and over. This thing was under my bed. This was on my bed. This was everywhere I went. I don't know what it was that really fascinated me with this, but it just clicked with me. So I'm going to take a look in here and see what's up with this. What was it that really grabbed me about this? Well, first off, it has Star Chaser. I love the, Star Chaser. I had this cartoon. I had it on DVD. I have it on DVD now, but it was really hard to find. This thing never came around the theaters. I just saw commercials for it and stuff, and this was fantastic. I think I put it in one of my first YouTube videos back in like 2011 or 12 about adult cartoons. Little did I know that people were. Um, here's some pages from the last Galactus stories. People didn't realize I was talking about movies meant for people over 18, not the PORN. Yeah, the last Galactus story, Terry Austin inks. I think this is where he actually eats the Earth. Yeah, and this little bubble city down here, those aren't clouds. I think that's supposed to be a city. I drew those things everywhere, and then I was watching Light Years, better known as Gondahar, and I would try to do the realistic shading and stuff that was in that guy's work. Yeah, but here's where Galactus finally eats the Earth. So when he took over Superman, I really was like meaning to go back and compare these to see if this is Krypton blowing up, if he used the same pages. And there's a little city that survived. I ripped this off so bad there for like a year or two in my art, drawing this city that survived. Hang on, Shakespeare. So, and that was it. She only got a few pages each with Galactus there. And then this one of the Cerebus stories I was telling you about. Cerebus is a kid. He's dragging this bag around, bumping her around. He's being really rough in it. And you come to find out that he's got a kid in it, and he makes the other kids pay him protection money so they won't put him in the bag. And this is where a little story where Cerebus discovers a girl, and what he does is hilarious. Fantastic. And then, of course, this artwork. I actually tried to do artwork like this picture here, where it's all one tone. That's how I described it, all blues. John J. Yeah, this artwork, stuff like this blew my mind back in the day when I was like 11 and 12. So, of course, yeah, I was all over this ink wash stuff. I mean, I remember this like yesterday now. Just fantastic stuff. Oh my gosh. I love this stuff. Samurais. So that's probably the biggest. Yeah, I can just go through these books and stuff. But I think that was a little bit more of it. These stories were a little bit more orderly and less chaotic than the stuff in heavy metal. And by this time, heavy metal was just a memory in my mind. So there's just a few more issues, but I think you kind of get the point here. I think I've shown enough. In Moonshadow, I can't get over how long Moonshadow has been around. This gets collected. Moonshadow started at Epic over at Marvel. It's James DeMante's adult story fairy tale. And then it was reprinted more or less with new covers and stuff at Vertigo in the 90s. And now it's had several collections. And and there's also a sequel to it, and it keeps getting collected. It seems like every few years, and James DeMante's is all over the media, social media, being like, check it out, buy this. All right, what we got here? That was a good little venture there, man. I appreciate everybody that's hung out. Okay, found a website. Well, it's not issue 27 or 34. Please tell me there are 100 issues to go through. No. Alien Legion. It's like you guys spoke it and it appeared. Kid Ragnarok. The ads are definitely a fun thing to look at in older magazines and comics. Absolutely. Scott Neely. Shoo, there are only 34 issues of Epic Illustrated. Other than Epic, and we're just on this journey with Scott Neely here, man. Other than Epic and Heavy Metal, what other magazines should I check out that are similar in the USA in the 80s? Guys, help them out. Throw it out there, man. Paulo Costa, I don't think there were any. There were anthologies, but they weren't magazine size. Eclipse had a few such ones. Continuity Comics had one, and I'm trying to think what it was called. It was magazines. It was comic book size, but it was a magazine. There's only 7 or 8 issues. I cannot believe I'm going blank on what it is, but the first cover had a Neil Adams cover of 2 cavemen squaring off. And as they went along, they had some really good stuff in there. Oh my God, what is it called? I probably have it on a bookshelf. But it was Continuity Comics answer to like a Heavy Metal. I'm trying to think what it was called. It's going to come to me when this is over. Sleeper Eater. Eclipse had a very short-lived magazine that was worth digging up. Fantastic. Paulo Costa, there were two UK magazines in the late 80s, early 90s. Marvel UK had Strip, and a smaller publisher had Toxic. Both had martial law stories. Martial law. Yes. Uh, whoa, whoa. The cover for number 29 is epic. I'll look that up here in a minute. Kid Ragnarok, Paulo Costa, Apocalypse was a publisher that put out Toxic, kind of a 2000 AD offshoot. You know what? I think I've heard of Toxic. Don't know how, don't know where, but Toxic's ringing a bell. Scott Neely, issue 29 of Epic Magazine is the one that Scott Neely was looking for. It's called Ghost in the Machine. He made it. That's not a Jim Steranko story, is it? So many people have done the Ghost in the Machine title. I'm wondering if that's a Steranko story. John Jones, always thought Epic was black and white artwork. No. That's what I mean. It's got a variety of stuff. Like I said, there's only one story that I pointed out talking about where I thought that should have been in color. Filter, they don't make books like this anymore. Absolutely not. And that's why I'm so glad I have these, because the crap they're putting out nowadays, it's not even a fact of nostalgia. It's not about being an old dinosaur and can't deal with change and all this stuff. It's that this stuff is just uninspired and derivative, and they're not unique anymore. I mean, how many Robins are out there right now? You know what I mean? How many Wolverines are floating around? And it just blows my mind. And like I said, that Earth X prequel book that I read, that character was just pathetic. This beta male mentality is supposed to be a starting point for a character, and you're supposed to develop their character where you get them out of that, and they become self-actualized and stuff. It's just horrible what they got out there. And this was the stuff that people were just doing as a standard in comics. It's just more inspired, more epic. They could get you more interested in a 3-page story than a 6-issue miniseries nowadays. It's amazing. Scott Neely, well, it was an epic journey, but it finally ended. Yeah. And that last Galactus story not getting finished, oh my gosh, that was probably one of the first geek rage, I guess. We had to find a word that I can sort of remember, but I was like right there. I was like, what? I remember having a little bit of anxiety walking around like, how's that story end? Just where it wasn't finished. Filter, they don't make books like this anymore. Filter also says he has Miss Mystic. Miss Mystic, I know the character from the covers and stuff. Never read one issue of her. She's floated around. I think it was Pacific Comics and then Continuity Comics, and I don't know. The fact that she has fans blows my mind, because I didn't realize there was enough material out there to have fans of Miss Mystic. White hair, black costume, cleavage. Kid Ragnarok, they certainly reinvigorated my interest in Epic Illustrated. The hunt is now on. And Kid Ragnarok, what I always say is, make sure you get a good deal, check them out, do a little sample here, because Epic Illustrated, I can't think of one bad issue. There might be issues that are better, you know what I mean? But even the worst issue of Epic Illustrated is better than a lot of other books out there. I loved them, but like I said at the beginning of this, I didn't realize it was more of the artwork that really grabbed me, that I remember the artwork more than the stories and stuff. John Jones must also piss collectors off that Epic finished without completing that last Galactus story. Yeah, that was a thing. And seriously, I remember reading like Comic Scene or whatever those whatever magazines you had back then that interviewed people. Every now and then I would see somebody mention the last Galactus story. It really was it was an albatross on collectors, around their neck. The Gray Man showed a couple of issues of Toxic in a recent video. The Gray Man. I wonder if I'm subscribed to him. Filter 2021. I got the first chapter of Last Galactus story cheap and in good condition. The first chapter of it. Yeah, I think it's fantastic. It really, to me, I think it really is some of John Byrne's most inspired work, I guess, in my opinion, as a guy, from reading it, no idea what was going through his head. Kid Ragnarok, I hate the idea that liking the older material is pure nostalgia and fear of change. The older stuff is just freaking solid. Yeah, that's what I mean. If you actually, that's one of the problems also with doing YouTube, in my opinion. from the stuff I like to talk about and the things that I'm interested in. You people, a lot of young people, and I'm sure I was the same way with music there for a little while. Don't get me wrong, but as soon as you bring out the older stuff or talk about things back in the day, if you use the wrong approach, they just shut down. There's no talking to them, and I'm sure if we all went back and remembered things, we all went through that phase and stuff, right? Oh man, people dropped out after I showed that got to the end there. So I appreciate everybody that's hung out. But yeah, the thing about it is that if you compare this stuff with what's out there, there's no argument to it. It's all about giving it a chance, and you know, you just gotta get on a path where you discover this stuff yourself and reach a point of maturity where you have a bit more open mind. We all get there. We all get there. And John Jones, in your opinion, what's the weakest epic issue? Oh, that is hard. I'm gonna go with God. It was getting there towards the end, I think. If I had to pick one, and like I said, even the worst issue of Epic is better than anything that's around, probably around this era. This is April 1985. Maybe a little bit before the last Galactus story jumped in there. And again, those aren't bad. I mean, I'm just saying, it was kind of like a little bit of a calm before the storm popped up, man. I'm still enjoying the weather and still digging the book, and nothing's wrong with it. But wow, bam, what's around the corner? All right, guys, I'm gonna get these back on the shelf. Like I said, these are very fragile. I don't want to keep a stack around, but there's a few I'm definitely going to be looking at and reading off and on. It's already 12:30, man. This day is shot, in my opinion, but I got a few things to do as normal, as I usually say. So if you guys got any more comments or questions, throw them out there. Otherwise, we're going to get on with our day. I hope everybody had a decent Valentine's Day, whether you were with somebody or not. So, oh man, but this was fun, man. This was fun. Filter, hey, Howler Mouse, have you ever got that comic called Creed? The art has an Eastman layered art style. That was about the kid back in the 90s. And I thought it was very McFarlane like, if it's the one I'm thinking of. Didn't really get into that. And believe it or not, that of all books, Cyberfrog seemed to have come out around the time. I knew people who loved Creed, but you're the first person I've heard in over 20 some years even talk about it. Didn't really get it. It was that, and then what was that? Space Ninja. There was a Space Ninja or something. Seems like there was a few books that came out around the times. Poison Elves, Creed, Space Ninja, Cyberfrog. Oh man. Oh, it's right on the tip of my tongue. There's a few books that seem to come out around that time. Paulo Costa, I'm just getting ready for Daytona 500 now. Nice. Nice. Oh man. And as usual, as this Zen, Scott Neely, well played, sir. Zen, the Space Ninja and stuff. There's a few books I did not check out because it seems like there was a glut of indie books all of a sudden. Zen, the Intergalactic Ninja. That's it. Nira X. I don't know. I don't know. That's that. I don't know. All right. As per usual, we got a few more people that popped in towards the end of this. So yeah, that's really all I got to show. Be excellent to one another, and let me know what you think. Share, like, hit that thumbs up. I just saw some of those yesterday. I had one. That's hilarious. Yeah. Okay, guys. Have an excellent day. Who knows? Maybe after I put these up and read a little bit and dig around and enjoy this day, I might, as usual, I might do something else. Hey, Kid Ragnarok, another nice chat in the books. Thanks, man. Scott Neely's going to be hunting for that Epic 29. Absolutely, man. Go for it. And you guys have a good one, man. Thanks for everybody popped in. Again, thumbs up, subscribe. And there we go. It is now an official Howler Mouse live stream. My phone's going off over here. Michael, anything by Richard Corbin? A few covers, but I didn't see. I can't recall any dev or anything in there. Like I said, I got to check them out. Like I said, it's got a guy named Tim Conrad who seems to be kind of coming off like Corbin in there, but I don't know, nothing really on top of my head with Corbin in there. Doesn't mean they're not there. Okay, guys. Anyway, thumbs up, like, share, let people know we're there. Heck, if you end up getting some Epic Illustrated, definitely let me know. Like I said, it's a fantastic book. Jared Osborne has almost a full set. Everybody that has them loves them, and be careful because, like I said, the books are very fragile when it comes to the cover and the inside pages over time. It's I find it very ironic that something that is one of the few things that I can tell you are rereadable, where you'll go back and look at them over and over and over, are so fragile. Blows my mind. And like people have pointed out here, they're probably not going to be collected, because people own the people who worked on it got to own their stuff. Corbin usually ran in heavy metal. Yeah, that was Corbin's home, in my opinion. Thank God for the dollar bin. If you find some Epic Illustrated in the dollar bin, you better pick every one of them up. I don't care if they are falling apart. You have some reader copies and you can get nicer issues later. Okay, guys, later. Good hunting and be excellent to one another. Nice. Great show, guys. Thanks a lot.